This next lesson is lesson 11, which is all about secondaries. So we start with clip number 12, and we actually end with clip number 12 as well. And we're going to put on the loop so you can just play it one time through. So the idea here is that we will make the pink helmet in the center here the only colored element. Everything else will be black and white, kind of a typical thing people want to try and do. So we start off with just talking about qualifiers. And qualifiers are ways to pull keys. And so the first thing you want to do is select the color that you want. You can just click on it. And then what you want to do is be able to see what the selection is. So we talk about going to the highlight and make sure you click on the button, and you can see how we didn't get much, so we can add come down and choose the selection range to add different selections to this. So we can make another selection here and there. Sometimes it's easier to turn off the highlight and pick a few more areas, come back to the highlight until you get a good selection like we have here. So you definitely want to explain that you pick to select the hue, and then you can see the qualifier palette down here, and you want to talk about the selection range in this button. Make sure you switch back off the plus to the regular selection when you're done with that. And you want to talk about the highlight and what you're seeing. You're seeing the selection made, which is in color, and everything else is in gray. And then you can come down and start talking about refining the palette here. And much like a keyer, it takes a lot of practice, but the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. So you talk about refining the parameters and adjusting pretty much the hue width will give you a better, in this shot anyway, will give you just increasing it a little bit, we'll get it. And then coming down to the saturation and luminance, really just the highs and lows. You can just play around with those just a little bit on both of them to get a good key out of this helmet. And that's about all you really need to do. It's just a few tweaks and you'll get there. And it's nice to show that you can turn off, like I just want to turn off the hue to see what the hue selection is giving me, or what the saturation is giving me, and what the luminance is giving me. Sometimes that can help you a lot when you're doing this. So you definitely want to point out that you can turn each of these hue, saturation, and luminance off just to see what it would be like without that parameter selection. Okay, once you pull that, you want to talk about switching from this highlight to a black and white highlight, which uses this button over here in the upper viewer, upper right corner, and that's going to give you a more traditional black and white mask. So once you've done the actual hue selection, it's good to come and now tweak the mask itself, and you do that using these matte finesse controls. And usually the clean black and clean white will give you kind of a better idea or a better control over that. So we're just going to boost up the clean white, boost up the clean black a little bit. You could talk about the other ones, you know, a black clip and a white clip, always very useful as well. And the blur, if we were trying to get a softer edge on this, a little bit of blur radius would help. Here we just want it to be hard, so we're going to leave it like that. So once you're done with that, you want to turn off the highlight, and it is very helpful to be able to see what you've actually selected other than just in a matte. And one way you can do that is just coming down to the hue control in your shared adjustments and just shifting the hue, and that gives you a much better idea, even beyond the black and white highlights, of what you've actually selected, because you can see it change color. And it looks like our center helmet is pretty good, so we're going to leave it there. And to reset the hue value or any adjustment here, you just double click on hue and it's back to its default setting. So now what we want to do is make everything else black. So if node 1 in the qualifier selects the pink helmet, or the color pink in general, we want to do the opposite of that to affect everything else. And the way you can do that is to right click over a node and choose add node, add outside node. Now the outside node basically inverts the mask that we created with the qualifier, and so the mask protects the helmet, and we can turn on the highlight. You can see it protects this helmet. That's why it's gray, it won't be touched, and everything else that is normal will be affected. So what we can do here is very easily come down to our adjustments again, come down to saturation, and just lower the saturation all the way down. And now everything else is black and white except anything that was protected by the qualifier or selected by the qualifier. Now if we wanted to, we could come back into our node 1 and we could come back to saturation and maybe boost that a little bit to make the pink really pop out even more. And then we go into talking about, so we did this and we can play it and people can see like, oh yeah, wow, that's amazing. That's great. We'll turn off the audio here. Right, so you can see that the pinks are selected and they're really boosting color, and everything else is black and white. And then we move on, we talk about there are other ways to make selections. We go to clip number 8, which is the one we used previously. And we talk about how we might want to maybe adjust the color of this box here. Right, this box, we might want to change the color to fit more in kind of with the rest of the tones of these, maybe more in a bluish tint to it. So what we're going to do is create something called a power window, and we're going to create that on a separate node. We're going to come in and say add node, add serial node. So now we have our second node. We're going to come into the power window, and we're going to talk about the different shapes you can create. And we just need to create, we can create a rectangle, or we can just create a line drawing, or whatever you want to do. We're going to create just a freehand drawing, so this next to last one here, and just draw a shape right around this box. Make it pretty big. Doesn't have to be really tight around it because the camera will move a little bit. So you want it to be a little loose. And now we have the shape drawn around here. What we can do is we can come into this node that we have here, right? And we can make a qualifier selection within this power window. So we'll come into our qualifier, and we're on node 2, and now we'll select a color, and we'll add a different color too, just to make sure that we're getting the ranges that we want to include. And then if we wanted to, we could, we could do the same thing. We could come over to our saturation and luminance. We could increase, the hue width to get more of that kind of red in the box, and we can go to the lows and the highs to cut out what we don't want and include what we do want. That's looking pretty good. Just like that. And we could do the same thing. We could go to our, matte finesse tools, clean black, clean white, and turn it off. And now all we'd have to do is to shift the colors, come down to our hue, or use any of our color adjustments, and just start dragging the hue. Maybe we want it to be purple, or we want it to be green, or something like that that fits a little bit nicer. There we have a nice blue box, and we can play that, and you can see it works out really, really well. So that's the ability to combine power windows and qualifiers. Then we go into, that was the fact that that was an easy one because the camera didn't move. So let's go down to our clip number 19 that we're going to use. 19 is this shot of this piñata here. And let's say we wanted to change the, the color of its eye right here instead of having it a blue eye. So what we're going to do is just, add a node, add a serial node. We're going to come in here and we're going to select with the qualifier. Make sure that you're on the selection, not the plus sign, but the actual default selection. And we're going to choose inside the eye. Now, this is where you can talk to them about going up to the magnification, increasing the magnification of this image to zoom in, using your middle mouse button to pan around, getting a better click on the eye here, and then coming in, use your clean black and clean white to get a really good matte around that eye. That's good enough for our purpose, so I'm going to leave it like there. And then you want to talk about resetting it to fit within the window. So now we have this selection, but the problem is that we're going to adjust if we change the color or the saturation or the hue, it's going to change other areas like on his foot here that have the same blue color. So we want to limit that by using a power window. So we're going to do that with the power window. We're going to choose a circular power window. We're going to come over to the eye, shrink it down. And again, like in lesson 9 when we talked about the softening, we can get rid of the softening because the eye doesn't have any softness on it. So we can just leave it like that. And now what we'll do is go to the tracker, just like we did in chapter 9, and we'll click on track. And now we can track forward with the eye, and the color change we did with the qualifier now happens in the eye, right? And now we can change that hue of that eye to be something maybe green. And now it doesn't affect the other blues in the area, just the eye, because the power window is protecting it. So really that's just a combination of power window, qualifier, and tracker now. And the last thing we do is talk about how we had originally talked about wanting to isolate this pink helmet and not have anything else in the image color, but we have everything that's pink still in color. So now that we know more about power windows and tracking, we can fix this as well. So we click on the power windows again, we add a circle power window, we shrink it down just to the size of our helmet. Again, the helmet doesn't have any softness, so we get it down to just that size of the helmet, and it's pretty tight in there. And then we come over to the tracker and track that. And now without that, now you can see we did a pretty good job. And you could tweak it if you wanted to, but it does a pretty good job by default, so people can see how that works. And that is really chapter 11. So next we'll move on to chapter 12, which is all about creating looks.